This week's video is all about how to get back to running after having had your baby. I've broken it down into 5 easy steps that I'm going to share with you in this week's video. Let's dive in. My name is Dr. Chris and I'm a sport and women's health physical therapist, and I help mamas get back to running strong without aches, leaks, or limitations. This week's video, I'm sharing my top 5 tips on how to get back to running after having had your baby and breaking it down into actionable steps so you know where to start from and where to get to in terms of your mother runner journey. This particular period postpartum, soon after having had your baby, is full of lots of question marks, and there isn't a lot of good guidance in terms of how to return to fitness, let alone how to return to running. Many women are given kind of that black hole of information from delivery to that 6-week window of just don't do anything other than take care of your little one. And then all of a sudden we end up at that 6-week postpartum visit, and most women are given the all clear to resume exercise and intimacy with your partner as it feels comfortable for you and just to listen to your body. That is not an actionable plan to know how to properly scale your return to exercise and fitness, and also doesn't give you an actionable step-by-step plan in order to know how to guide your body and how to listen to that body as you are navigating this new phase of postpartum healing and getting back to fitness. So this week's video is going to help break those things down more clearly so that listen to your body and ease back into things is much more clear. So before we get started, go ahead and hit subscribe and like this video, and I'm going to go ahead and break down the top 5 steps in order for you to better understand how to guide yourself successfully back to running wild. First and foremost, the most important thing is making sure that we have the prerequisites to be able to return to run safely. What do I mean by prereqs? Prerequisites in terms of, do we have the capacity of strength within our system to be ready to return to a high dynamic activity and a high impact activity like running. Most women are not yet ready for a return to run situation at that 6-week postpartum visit. Your body is still well within a very early recovery window. Soft tissues such as the pelvic floor and our abdominal muscles are still very much healing from that amazing yet really challenging process of pregnancy and delivery. And returning to a high impact activity like running, which typically requires 2.5 to 4 times of our body weight being supported by each leg as we step and run, is a lot of force and requires a lot of strength within our body to be able to do that successfully, and also over the course of multiple miles. So we want to make sure that before we use running to get fit, we need to make sure we are fit to be able to run. I'm going to say that one more time. Before we use running as a way to get fit, we need to make sure that we are fit enough to be able to run. So what do I mean by that? We need to make sure that we have good coordination between our pelvic floor and our core muscles, as well as 360-degree strength around our pelvis. We want to make sure that our core muscles, our hip flexors, our glutes, our inner thighs, and our hamstrings are all really strong and ready to go for us in order to be successful with that return to run. Those muscles have to do a lot while we're running, but they're also doing a lot during our day-to-day activities to support us and do all of the heavy lifting that is required in mom life. Anywhere from the squatting and lunging and picking up little ones, picking up heavy things like car seats and strollers, all of the nursing that you're doing day to day. Mom life is a endurance and resistance activity all day long. So we want to make sure that we have enough strength in our system before we start to add a high dynamic activity like running. Most women that I find in my practice that run into running related injuries, and especially during this postpartum period, often are returning to running too quickly and are needing to really focus on rebuilding that base of strength within the system before we can then have the prerequisites to run. So again, we want to make sure that we have good hip strength and good core strength and good coordination between those two team players in order for our system to be able to handle the high dynamic loading of running. Other special considerations here too, especially on why we need more strength in that system, is because the postpartum body is still going through a lot of changes from a hormonal standpoint, one of which is keeping a lot of hyperflexibility in the system for longer than most women realize. So during pregnancy, we have relaxin hormone, which is helping the body to accommodate a lot of stretching and space that's needed to accommodate baby's growth. And while we shift into that postpartum period, we still have some of that hyper flexibility in the system, which is requiring more strength to be able to support that flexible system. The other piece too is that if we are nursing, that's also going to keep that hypermobile body for longer in our system. And that lasts for up to 3 months after breastfeeding is fully concluded. So this is also another reason why we definitely need more strength training into the system, and why strength work is my #1 recommendation for all mamas newly postpartum to focus on before we even start to think about anything cardiovascularly related and or especially getting back to running. We need that strength to support that hypermobile system. We also need that strength to be able to support the body for all of the heavy lifting that you're doing all day long. And it's also really important for building our bone mineral density stores, which I'll talk about a little bit later in my future tips here, because that's also a big reason why we need more support when we're breastfeeding, because all that calcium is being optimized and taken from your body to your little one to help with their bone density growth. But you're losing a lot in that process, which is needed for our healthy bones to be able to tolerate the higher impact loads of running later on. So strength work is my #1 recommendation first before we even start to talk about running. And I have created a movement checklist that goes through what are the strength prerequisites that you need more specifically. And I'm gonna leave that down in the comments below, so feel free to click on that link and get a copy for yourself. And I also have another video where I go through each of those checkpoints and how to administer that movement test for yourself to see, are you ready to run, or do we have some opportunities to improve our strength and balance in some places, and what to do in order to help you get back to running after you've taken that test. So feel free to check that out down below. My second recommendation is really following a very gradual return to run. And I know that phrase gradual return to run can be very subjective, so I'm going to break it down a little bit more specifically and also help explain the why behind gradual being so important for decreasing our risk for developing overuse injuries, as well as to accommodate the really unique phase of this postpartum period where recovery is really limited. And when I say recovery, I'm talking about sleep deprivation. When we are in that newly postpartum period, sleep is not on its usual regular cycle. You're often getting just little pockets of a few hours here and there between nursing, and mamas, you're really not getting any downtime whatsoever. You are on this 2 to 3 hour shift continuously, and your body is getting much less sleep and recovery time, not only for recovery between workouts, but recovery for your healing of your whole body. So a really gradual return to run is critical in order to accommodate this very unique and challenging phase of lack of recovery and poor sleep, in addition to helping our tissues be able to acclimate back to fitness and exercise and loading our tissues so that we don't overload them past their capacity, which then results in overuse injuries, often kind of tendinitis injuries, aches and pains in our knees and our hips and low back. Often too is a big factor in terms of stress fractures that can happen. So as I mentioned in my previous point, when we're nursing, the body is taking all of that calcium store and it's prioritizing it away from mom's body in order to make it accessible and available for baby's body via your milk supply. In this phase, we are needing to be especially thoughtful of how we are leading mamas back to high impact activities and making sure that there's a really thoughtful gradual progression in order to not overload those bones past their capacity. Stress fractures become a really big limiter in terms of women getting back to running, and I find a lot of my mamas, without being given good information about this, run themselves too fast and too quickly into a stress fracture. Mamas, you don't have time for that, not just for sidelining you from running, but also being in a boot or being restricted from being able to move in the ways that you need to while taking care of little ones just isn't convenient. So this is where gradual loading of those tissues is really important in order to allow your body to build that capacity back up. Time under tension is what we use in the physical therapy world to work on grading our body back up to higher impact activities safely and effectively. And running is one of those specific activities that we want to be especially thoughtful of with time under tension. Because as I mentioned before, when we're running, we are holding our body under 2.5 to 4 times our body weight with every single step. So our body needs to be able to maintain and load that capacity successfully over one leg at a time for however long we're running. And we need to gradually ease the body back into that. So I often recommend with my mamas, first we need to check all the boxes on that movement checklist, which I mentioned in the previous point, and that link is down below so you can get a copy for yourself and test yourself through that to see where you are. Once we've hit all of those check marks in terms of our movement prereqs, then we're ready to start a gradual return to run. With that gradual return to run, I'm often starting my moms on a run-walk cycle. So we're doing anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes of running to 3 minutes of walking. And I'm doing that for about 5 cycles. And then we're slowly adding another minute each week of running and taking away a minute of walking. And then eventually we work up to about 15 minutes of continuous running. And then I'm slowly adding about 2.5 minutes every single week thereafter, and eventually slowly working ourselves up to a continuous run of 30 minutes. So this is a very gradual and thoughtful progression, to accommodate for the time under tension of our tissues, but also to accommodate the cardiovascular system needing to build up that capacity again, also accommodating again for that lack of sleep that we're often battling too, and also being thoughtful if we are nursing, that we're being thoughtful of the body already working overtime in a lot of different ways and not wanting to add more stress to the system. Exercise is absolutely wonderful, but if we're not being thoughtful of the volume that we're adding into the system, along with all the other pieces that are occurring within your world, we're not being thoughtful of how that exercise can then become a drain on your energy tank rather than something that is helping to support the system. So we don't want to get into an overtraining situation, which is then draining your energy tank even further than it's already being challenged. And in that case, exercise is becoming more of a stress to the system rather than a benefit. So we want to be thoughtful of that grading, and we want to be gradually introducing that run walk, and then eventually working it up into smaller increments of continuous running, and then slowly adding on minutes at a time to give plenty of space for adaptation, as well as to give you feedback in your body of how's my body feeling as we're adding more load to the system. And if we need to give your space more time to acclimate to those periods, we know exactly where that benchmark is. I find a lot of my mamas that don't do this type of grading in the beginning often start out and just go out for 10 or 20 minutes on a run or go to try to run a mile, and we don't realize how many steps are needed to complete a mile and how much stress that puts on the system if we're not gradually loading over time. So this gradual progression is really helpful to give your body the most successful re-entry back into a high activity like running. My third tip is to consider using time versus distance as your way to measure the length of your workout. So often I find runners are using distance in terms of miles to evaluate how long their workout's going to be. For example, I'm going to run and go do a mile today, or I'm going to run for 2 miles. I understand the logic in using distance as a way to measure how long we're working. However, back to my previous point of thinking about that gradual return, and also with respect to that time under tension of our tissues, it's actually a more efficient strategy and a safer strategy to measure how long your workout is based on minutes, hence that time under tension, versus distance. We can take 10 different people and tell them all to run a mile, and they're all going to run that mile at a different amount of time, which means that their tissues are under load for a different amount of time. So it's actually more helpful to flip that equation and to tell everyone to run for 10 minutes, because then we know that everyone's system was under the same amount of load for the same amount of time. Using time as a way to measure your workouts is a much more effective way to then be scaling your runs and to also be giving enough acclimation time to your tissues. So this is again where I start my moms with that kind of run walk program of 2 to 3 minutes on and 2 to 3 minutes off, and cycling through 5 rounds so that we have minutes that will give us the time for our workout. And then that's how we're adding incrementally each week until we're up to continuous workouts of running without breaks. The distance will naturally come with that. And most of my runners and most of us runners in general like to know how far we went. And usually we've got a smartwatch or a smartphone, something like that that we're using as a way to track how far we've gone. So you can always be using that still to record, but using time as your benchmark of when you start and stop. That will then automatically, as you progress through that gradual return to run program, you're gonna see your stats of how your distance changes and acclimates over time as well automatically. So flip that script of using distance as your measure and instead use time. And that time will then give you a more effective measure of how long your tissues are under tension and also give you a better benchmark for how you're performing over time, because you're going to start to see how much more distance you can cover in the same amount of time it used to take you in previous weeks. And you'll start to notice that that's a much more helpful way to also measure your progress over time. Tip number 4 is alternating strength days with your running days. So I find that as we start to get more and more into our running routine and being able to get back to running, our strength work starts to fall off the radar. We as women cannot afford to stop strength training, not just during this postpartum recovery period, but in general, and especially in order to be a successful runner, strength training needs to be a required part of our week. Strength training is especially important for keeping our muscles strong for that higher loading that running requires. Friendly reminder, when we're running, again, we have 2.5 to 4 times our body weight that's needing to be supported with every single step. We need to be supporting that loading in our system by alternating our running days with strength work days. This also helps to, again, support that time under tension and also be loading the system in different ways so that we have some movement diversity in our week for our workouts. Movement diversity helps to create different tension throughout our body, different healthy stresses on the system so that we're not overloading our body in the exact same way all the time. Strength work is also especially important for reducing our risk for overuse injuries. It also decreases our risk for developing osteopenia, which is the precursor for osteoporosis. It helps to improve that bone mineral density stores, which is especially important for us ladies, because that starts to deteriorate as we age and accelerates as we're nursing. And so we need to be replenishing those calcium stores into the system by doing regular strength training work. So I recommend that my mamas shoot for 60 minutes a week. This can be divided up however you want in your week and however it is available in mom life, because I know sometimes some days are easier to fit it in than others. So in general, I find that giving my mamas the recommendation of 60 minutes in a week and distributing those minutes however they work in your schedule is helpful. So this can be 10 minutes a day. This can also be, for example, 3 20-minute sessions a week. Sometimes it can be a variety of those different combinations, but shooting and eventually trying to work into a schedule where you are having alternate days of strength work and alternate days of your running sessions. This is a perfect recipe to help keep your body healthy and effective for mom life with all the heavy lifting that you're doing, because moms, a stroller and a car seat without any kiddos and without any supplies in it, on average run to between about 25 to 35 pounds. Then when we add kiddos into that and all your gear and all the things, mom life is not a low resistance activity. So this strength training work is not just helping you stay active and healthy and strong in your running, but it's also helping you for everyday life. So strength work is critical in order to keep our bodies strong and also to help support all of the activities that we want to be participating in our day-to-day. My fifth and final tip is about speed work. So I find that a lot of my mamas, as soon as they start getting back into their groove of running, want to know how to increase their speed. They want to get back to their pre-pregnancy pace, and I totally understand wanting to feel like themselves again. One of the biggest challenges I find with a lot of my moms is that they are trying to work on speed work way too soon into their return to run journey. We need to be able to build a base of easy runs before we can start to add the complication of speed work. So just like I mentioned in point number 1, we need our base of strength in order to return to running. We also need our base of running in order to start to work on speed work. We need those building blocks in order to be successful for the long game of increasing our pace. pacing is also really important too when we're looking at our recovery, our quality of sleep, how we're fueling our body, all of those things too. But the primary piece that I often find that's missing is that we're not giving our body enough acclimation time to have a base of easy runs in our system, to have that capacity to then start to tweak things and have some workouts in our week that are challenging our speed work with intervals and other higher intensity sessions in order to help start to work on that piece of our running as well. So when I say you need to have a base of running, what do I mean? I often recommend that we need to be working up to a capacity of having about 3 runs a week and upwards of 25 to 30 minutes per session for a total of about 1 continuous month. And with that continuous month, I'm also expecting that we have a regular schedule of strength training on alternate days through those weeks as well. So as I mentioned in the previous point, I want 60 minutes of strength work in a week. That can be divided up however it fits into your mom life schedule, but ideally, eventually working towards having alternate days on your running and your strength work days. So we have about 60 minutes or so of our strength work, and then we're also getting somewhere around 60 to 90 minutes or so of easy runs. And when I say easy runs, I mean you're going out there, you're letting your body kind of flow, you're not pushing yourself or feeling overly exerted. You could have a casual conversation with someone who was running next to you. That's a good way to kind of gauge, is this an easy run or am I challenging myself past that easy capacity? I want you to be able to have an easy conversation with someone next to you while you're running for those 30 minutes and working up to having that capacity 3 times a week for 4 full weeks. So we want to have a good 4-week base of easy runs and consistent strength. Then we can start to talk about how to add speed work and also how to start adding that extra tissue load to the system. Because back to my previous point about time under tension and gradually adding in our return to run, we also want to be thoughtful of how we gradually increase the intensity of our runs as we're working on speed work. We can very quickly run ourselves into a running related injury by upping up the pace too quickly and too fast, and or over too long of a duration of time without the body having enough space to acclimate. So this is where having that 1 month of good, solid, easy runs has given our whole system enough time to acclimate to time under tension in that way. It's given our tissues a lot of resiliency, our muscles and our bones also to catch up and be ready for that type of load. And then we're starting to add usually about 1 workout of those 3 in the week of our run sessions to have some type of interval or higher intensity threshold runs. And then over time, I'm starting to tweak that depending on what my run clients' goals are, if they're training for a race or wanting to hit a specific pace, and then we start to tweak their training plan accordingly. But just to give kind of a general guideline, again, you want to have 4 solid weeks of 3 30-minute runs, easy pace, and also being able to hit that 60-minute strength training requirement every single week as well. My top 5 tips in order to get back to running successfully after having had your baby. Number 1, we want to make sure that we are fit enough to run, not running to get fit. We want to make sure that we have the movement prerequisites, i.e. strength capacity in and around our pelvis and our core and pelvic floor in order to support the high impact activities of running. If you want that copy of that checklist I mentioned in order to best assess where are you in your strength training journey, feel free to find that link below and you can run yourself through that test to see where you are, if you're ready to return to running, or if you have some opportunities of where specifically to improve in terms of hip or core or balance training. Number 2, we want to make sure that we have a really thoughtful gradual return to our running in order to reduce our risk for overuse injuries. Too often I see my mamas getting back to running too quickly and not with enough acclimation time, nor with enough alternate days of strength work and running work, and we start to run ourselves into an overuse injury very quickly and or a stress fracture. I don't want either of those for any of my mother runners, so we want to be thoughtful of that gradual return. Number 3, we want to be thoughtful also that we are using time versus distance as a way to measure the duration of our running workouts. Time gives us a much better benchmark of how much our tissues are being loaded under tension, that time under tension I was mentioning earlier, versus using a specific distance of mileage to be able to measure that. the distance doesn't give us a good clarity. We want to use the time as a way to then be able to gradually add incremental time to our tissues and our system to know that we're gradually loading in an effective way. Number 4, we also want to be thoughtful that as we are continuing to get more excited and having a bigger capacity for our running in our week, that we don't let the strength training drop off. Strength training is essential in order for us to stay injury-free and also to be able to continue to add longer distances to our weekly mileage without running into overuse injuries. And also, like I said, mom life is not low impact, nor is it low resistance. You are constantly lifting, carrying, nursing, lots of heavy things and little ones as well. So using that strength training not just for your running, but it's also helping you in day-to-day life as well. And then finally, number 5, how to increase your speed. We want to be thoughtful that we've got a solid base of running for the duration of approximately 1 month before we start to think about anything related to speed work and upping the intensity. We need 4 solid weeks of 30-minute runs 3 times a week, plus hitting that 60 minutes of strength work every single week for an entire month before we even think about putting speed work on the table. Once we've got that running base, then we can start to add intensity with intervals or threshold runs. So I hope you all found this helpful, and I hope it gives a little bit more clarity around that whole phrase of just ease back into things, because as you can see, there's a lot more to consider in this process of returning to exercise, and especially returning to a high impact activity like running. If this video was helpful, I'd love for you to share it out with somebody, share it with another mother runner. Also, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. If this video was helpful, I'll be sharing plenty more like this on this channel weekly, and I would love for you to know when they drop. Also, feel free to check out the links below for some additional videos that I found helpful, that if you liked this one, I have a good idea that you will like the other ones that I listed below as well. So if you have any questions, comments, I'd also love for you to drop those so I can connect with you and help you further on your return to run or mother journey. Take care, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.